So if I handed you, say, $80 million today, basic mathematics says you'd be completely financially secure for the rest of your life. Like, your children would be secure, your grandchildren would be secure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you were talking about generational wealth at that point.
Right. But human psychology dictates a much, much darker reality. According to the data, if I gave you that $80 million, within a few years, you would very likely look at your bank accounts, feel this deep, agonizing panic in your chest, and genuinely believe that you actually need $160 million just to survive.
Yeah, and it sounds completely absurd when you frame it that way.
Right.
We are conditioned to believe that wealth is, a cure-all, an absolute shield against anxiety.
Exactly.
But the research into the psychology of extreme wealth reveals a landscape of human behavior that actively defies mathematical logic. It just doesn't make sense on a spreadsheet.
Today, we are exploring why the human brain is biologically wired to destroy the joy of wealth. Because, since we were kids, we have all been sold a very specific, very compelling myth. It is the myth of the literal finish line.
Right, the idea that you just have to reach a certain number.
Yeah, you know the narrative, you work hard, you secure the high-paying job, you negotiate the aggressive raise, and eventually you cross some invisible tape at the end of the track. And the promise is that once you cross it, you achieve permanent, unshakable happiness.
It's framed as binary, right?
Yes. You are either running the race or you have crossed the line and you are immune to the human condition.
And that comforting narrative is exactly what falls apart when you examine the actual data. When researchers study individuals who have sprinted like light years past that imaginary finish line.
The ultra-wealthy.
Exactly. People who have accumulated wealth on a scale that most of us cannot even conceptualize. They do not find a population of enlightened, permanently blissful Zen masters. They find a highly predictable psychological crisis.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to dissect the heavily documented psychological pivot that high net worth individuals either successfully make or disastrously fail to make.
And it is heavily documented. We have decades of data on this.
We do. We are going to examine how the truly successful ones stop optimizing for money entirely and start optimizing for time, for simplicity, and for systemic impact. And to be clear, we are not doing this just to rubberneck at billionaires.
No, not that.
We are taking these extreme case studies and translating them into actionable human capital strategies for you, the listener. Whether you are managing an enterprise budget or trying to figure out how to allocate your first big year-end bonus.
Because the mechanics of this shift are universal. They apply to a founder selling a tech unicorn just as much as they apply to a young professional navigating their first major promotion. We're looking at fundamental human biology here.
We really are. We have a fascinating stack of sources in front of us today. We are pulling from an extensive investigative synthesis that combines real-world case studies of legendary investors and tech founders with, decades of peer-reviewed psychological and economic research.
It's a great collection of data.
It is. We are going to dive into the literal biology of how our brains define what is normal, the methodology behind famous lottery winner studies, the mechanics of extreme philanthropy, and even the unsettling data behind judicial parole boards.
Which is a terrifying study, by the way.
Oh, we will get into it. But where do we even begin to dismantle this finish line myth? Right at the beginning, I think we have to confront the concept of the Happiness Plateau.
Yeah, that's the best starting point.
And that means digging into the landmark 2010 study out of Princeton University. This was conducted by the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman and the economist Angus Deaton, who actually also later won a Nobel.
That study is the cornerstone of modern behavioral economics for a reason. Kahneman and Deaton didn't just survey a couple of hundred people in a specific tax bracket. They analyzed over 450,000 responses to the Gallup Healthways Well-Being Index.
450,000, that is a massive sample size.
It was huge. This was population-level data that allowed them to chart the exact intersection of income and emotional state across a staggering cross-section of society.
And the brilliance of their methodology, at least to me, was that they stopped treating happiness as one giant, vague monolith. They split it into two distinct categories.
Right, the experiencing self and the remembering self.
Exactly. First, you have your day-to-day emotional well-being. This is the experiencing self. Like, how much did you laugh yesterday? How much anger, sadness, or acute stress did you feel on a random Tuesday afternoon?
And then the second category is life evaluation, or life satisfaction. This is the remembering self. When you take a step back, look at the grand arc of your existence and ask yourself, Am I a success? How do you rate your life?
Those are two radically different experiences. I mean, it is the difference between feeling proud of your career trajectory when you reflect on it over a glass of wine on a Friday night versus the visceral panic of realizing your car needs a new transmission and you don't have the cash to fix it on a Tuesday morning.
That's a great way to put it. And the data revealed a fascinating divergence between those two states. Kahneman and Deaton found that your life evaluation, that broad sense of achievement, it continues to rise alongside income indefinitely.
So the richer you get, the more successful you feel when you think about your life.
Precisely. The more money you make, the higher you tend to rate your overall success. However, your day-to-day emotional well-being, the actual minute-to-minute joy and lack of stress you experience, absolutely rises with income, but only up to a very specific, hard inflection point.
And at the time of the study's publication in 2010, that inflection point was famously cited as an annual household income of roughly $75,000.
Right. The famous 75K number.
I have to stop you there, though, because I can hear every single person listening from New York, London, or San Francisco rolling their eyes into the back of their heads. The idea that $75,000 solves all your daily stress in a modern metropolitan city in 2026 is, frankly, laughable.
Oh, completely. It wouldn't even cover rent in some of those places.
Right. So if we are trying to give practical advice here, is this data just hopelessly outdated?
Well, that is a crucial pushback. And you are entirely correct that the raw number itself is a moving target. Inflation, housing crises, and local cost of living adjustments mean that in a major city today, that number might be closer to $150,000 or $200,000.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
But the specific dollar amount was never the profound takeaway of the research. The profound takeaway is the existence of the plateau itself.
Ah, I see.
The underlying principle is that up to a certain threshold, whatever that threshold happens to be for your specific zip code and family size, every dollar you earn is actively solving a tangible physical threat.
It is removing scarcity. It is paying the rent, keeping the heat on, buying high-quality food, and ensuring you can afford medical care. Money is exceptionally efficient at eradicating the miseries associated with poverty.
Yes, but once those baseline physiological and safety needs are met, the mechanics of income completely change. Past that plateau, the researchers found that additional income kept boosting that abstract life satisfaction score, but it completely stopped moving the needle on moment-to-moment happiness.
Wow.
The emotional return on every extra dollar shrinks to essentially zero.
Let's ground this for the listener. If you jump from making your baseline safety number, let's call it $100,000 for the sake of argument, to making $200,000, you will absolutely feel prouder of yourself when you update your LinkedIn profile.
Oh yeah, huge ego boost.
Right. You will feel a surge of ego satisfaction when you tell your parents about the promotion. But your Tuesday does not feel any happier. The day-to-day joy flatlines. You are still annoyed in traffic, you still get frustrated with your spouse, and you still feel the same low-level existential dread on a Sunday night.
You're exactly right. And the biological and psychological mechanism driving that flatline is arguably one of the most rigorously studied phenomena in all of psychology. Researchers call it hedonic adaptation.
Hedonic adaptation.
Yes, the core concept is that human beings possess a baseline level of happiness. Regardless of what external events occur, whether wildly positive or devastatingly negative, our brains are biologically hardwired to eventually drift back to that baseline.
The sources reference the legendary line of research from the 1970s regarding lottery winners, and this is a study that gets thrown around a lot in pop psychology, so let's actually dig into the methodology of what happened there.
Absolutely. The foundational study was published in 1978 by Philip Brickman, Dan Coates, and Ronnie Janoff-Bowman. They took 3 distinct groups of people.
Okay.
The first group consisted of recent winners of the Illinois State Lottery. People who had experienced massive, sudden, unexpected financial windfalls. The second group was a control group of average people. And the third group consisted of victims of devastating accidents who had recently become paralyzed.
Which is an incredibly stark contrast to set up. I mean, the myth of the finish line dictates that the lottery winners should be permanently euphoric, living in a state of untouchable bliss, right?
That's the assumption.
And while the accident victims should be permanently plunged into absolute despair.
Yet the research showed something that completely upended our understanding of human resilience and adaptation. The researchers asked all 3 groups to rate their past, present, and expected future happiness. They also asked about the pleasure they derived from mundane daily activities, like talking with a friend or eating breakfast.
And what did they find?
The findings were staggering. Once the initial shock and thrill faded, the lottery winners reported essentially the same level of present happiness as the control group.
Wait, really? The exact same?
It's essentially the same, yes. Furthermore, the lottery winners actually reported taking significantly less pleasure in mundane daily events than the other groups. The massive spike of dopamine from winning millions had effectively blown out their receptors, making everyday joys feel dull by comparison.
That is wild. And what about the accident victims?
Well, while the accident victims did report a lower present happiness level than the control group, it was nowhere near as low as one might assume. They were still able to find significant joy in daily activities, and their expected future happiness was incredibly high.
It's amazing how resilient the human brain is.
It really is. Now, the contemporary sources we are reviewing are careful to point out that later, more rigorous studies have refined parts of this 1978 research. The reset to baseline is not always a perfect mathematical return to zero, especially in cases of severe trauma or extreme systemic poverty.
But the core mechanism holds up. The human brain simply gets used to whatever level of stimulus it is repeatedly exposed to. It resets its definition of what is normal.
Exactly. It's sensory gating on an emotional level.
You know, it reminds me of the mechanics of a role-playing video game.
Oh, how so?
Well, you start out with this basic entry-level armor, and every low-level enemy you encounter feels terrifying and challenging. You spend hours grinding, saving up gold, and finally you buy the legendary top-tier armor.
Right.
And for exactly one level, the game feels incredible. You are invincible. You are tearing through enemies, and the dopamine hit is massive.
You feel like you've beaten the system.
Exactly. But then the game's programming adjusts. The next environment loads, and the enemies are suddenly scaled up to match your new stats.
Yeah.
You are wearing the best, most expensive armor in the entire game, but you feel exactly as vulnerable, and the game is exactly as difficult as it was at level 1.
That is a perfect visualization of hedonic adaptation. The new luxury car feels absolutely incredible for the first month. You notice the smell of the leather, the smoothness of the acceleration, the way people look at you at stoplights.
Yep, the honeymoon phase.
And then, slowly, imperceptibly, the brain's sensory gating mechanisms kick in. It just becomes your car. It becomes the metal box you sit in while you stress about being late for a meeting.
Just a faster box.
Right. And the new sprawling house feels like an unbelievable dream when you get the keys. But 6 months later, it is just the place where you live. It is the place where the roof leaks, where you have to do the laundry, and where you argue about what to watch on television.
It's so true.
The human brain is a relentlessly efficient machine designed to make the extraordinary feel entirely ordinary.
I want you, listening to this right now on your commute or at your desk, to really interrogate that concept in your own life. Think back to your last major raise or that significant purchase you saved up for months to acquire. Think about the anticipation.
It's usually better than the reality.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, honestly, ask yourself, how long did the actual visceral thrill last? How many weeks or days did it take before that new higher salary just became the new normal budget? Before that incredible new smartphone just became the glass rectangle you endlessly doom scroll on?
Our neurobiology is quite literally designed to erase the thrill of new wealth. From an evolutionary perspective, it is a survival mechanism.
Really? How so?
Well, think about it. If an early human found a massive bush of berries and stayed in a state of permanent contented euphoria, they would stop scanning the horizon. They would stop looking for the next threat or the next opportunity, and they would be eaten by a predator. We are wired for perpetual seeking, not perpetual arriving.
That sets up a fascinating and somewhat terrifying premise. If our biology guarantees that the thrill of the money will eventually fade and that we will adapt to whatever luxury we acquire, what actually happens to the people who climb to the very top of the financial ladder?
It's the multi-million-dollar question.
If you accumulate hundreds, millions, or billions of dollars, and hedonic adaptation has erased the thrill of the mansions, the private jets, and the status, I mean, what is left? Does everyone who reaches that level automatically realize the game is rigged and become an enlightened philosopher?
The data provides a very dark answer to that question. The shift toward enlightenment, or even basic contentment, is absolutely not guaranteed.
So they don't just chill out?
No, not at all. In fact, without severe intentional psychological intervention, many individuals become trapped on what researchers in behavioral economics informally call the hedonic treadmill of wealth.
The treadmill.
Yeah.
Because you are sprinting as fast as humanly possible, burning immense amounts of energy, but emotionally, you are staying in the exact same place.
Exactly. And this brings us to a wildly revealing body of survey research highlighted in our sources, drawing heavily from the work of researchers like Michael Norton at Harvard Business School and studies conducted by the Center on Wealth and Philanthropy at Boston College.
Okay, I love this part. Tell me about the survey.
These researchers managed to get access to a highly guarded demographic. They surveyed multi-millionaires, individuals with net worths ranging from a baseline of $1 million all the way up to $80 million or more.
That is a tough group to get on the phone.
Yeah.
It's very tough. And they asked them a surprisingly simple, direct question. They asked, how much money would it take for you to feel perfectly happy and financially secure?
Let's really think about that scale. If you are sitting on $1 million, you have a solid cushion. But if you have $80 million in liquid assets or investments, you possess generational wealth. The math is undeniable. So the answer from the $80 million cohort has to be, well, I am already there. I have won the game.
Right.
You would logically assume that. But the survey results completely defied financial logic. Over and over again, regardless of what wealth bracket the respondent was in, the answer they gave tended to be roughly double whatever they currently possessed.
Wait, let me make sure I'm grasping the scale of this delusion. A person sitting on $1 million looks at their accounts and says, I just need $2 million and then I can finally exhale.
Yeah.
But a person sitting on $80 million looks at their portfolio, experiences the exact same physiological feeling of lack, and genuinely tells a researcher that they need $160 million to feel safe.
That's exactly what the data shows.
How is it biologically possible for someone with $80 million to experience the identical financial anxiety as someone with $1 million?
This raises an important question. It makes no sense on a spreadsheet, but it makes absolute sense if you understand the mechanics of the treadmill and the shifting nature of peer groups.
Shifting peer groups.
Yes. The tension here is that the shift from viewing money as a goal to viewing money as a tool does not happen automatically. Your brain doesn't receive a software update just because your bank account crosses an 8-figure threshold.
It's still running the same old caveman software.
Exactly. If an individual never consciously, painfully changes their optimization target, the goal remains simply the number.
And because numbers are infinite, the finish line by definition must continuously move away from you.
Furthermore, as your wealth increases, your reference group changes. The person with $1 million is comparing themselves to their neighbor with a slightly larger house. The person with $80 million is no longer looking at the middle class.
Right, they're looking at other titans.
They're comparing themselves to the billionaire with a larger family office, a bigger foundation, or a more prestigious art collection. The feeling of relative deprivation remains entirely intact, just at a higher altitude.
The tragedy of that mindset is almost hard to fathom. I mean, you can have an executive earning $50 million a year who is utterly miserable. They are grasping for more, they are terrified of losing their social status, and they feel entirely inadequate every time they attend a gala with people wealthier than them.
They never feel like it's enough.
They're experiencing the exact same cortisol spikes, the exact same physiological stress as they did when they were struggling to pay off their student loans. They just have nicer furniture to be anxious on.
That's incredibly well said. Meanwhile, you can have someone with a fraction of that wealth, someone who has deliberately made peace with their baseline, who recognizes that their biological and safety needs are permanently met, who is living a vastly richer, deeply contented life.
It's wild.
And the investigative reporting makes a point to emphasize that we cannot gloss over this reality. It is a cultural blind spot. We love the fairy tale that everyone who gets incredibly rich eventually transcends materialism and uses their wealth for good.
We want to believe they become superheroes.
Right. But a significant percentage of the ultra-wealthy, by their own self-reporting in anonymous surveys, feel like they are constantly behind. They never stepped off the treadmill. They never made the psychological pivot.
Okay, so staying on the treadmill is a guaranteed path to perpetual high-end misery. But what does it actually look like when the ultra-wealthy do figure this out? When they realize that the biology of hedonic adaptation is undefeated and they consciously decide to hit the emergency stop button on the treadmill, what are they doing instead?
When an individual successfully steps off the treadmill, a profound behavioral shift occurs. They stop managing their money in order to acquire more physical goods or status symbols, and they begin using their immense capital to manage a completely different, infinitely more finite resource,
Which is
their daily mental bandwidth.
And this is where the behavior of the mega-rich starts to actually offer practical blueprints for the rest of us. Because if hedonic adaptation is real, then the smartest people with the most resources should be the ones to figure this out the fastest.
They have the means to test it.
Exactly. They are the ones who have the capital to run the experiment over and over again. They have bought the third house, the luxury boat, the bespoke wardrobe, and they have realized empirically that none of it permanently moved the happiness needle.
Exactly. And you see this realization manifest physically in the fascinating phenomenon of extreme minimalism inside extreme wealth. The sources dedicate significant time to two incredibly famous case studies of this behavior, Mark Zuckerberg and the late Steve Jobs.
Let's break down Zuckerberg first, because it is an image burned into the cultural consciousness. For a massive stretch of his career as CEO, Zuckerberg was photographed wearing functionally the exact same outfit every single day. A plain gray t-shirt and jeans.
The iconic uniform.
Right. This is a man running one of the most powerful, complex companies on the planet, possessing a personal net worth soaring past $100 billion, and he dresses like a college sophomore running late for a morning lecture.
It's jarring when you think about it.
It became such a ubiquitous talking point that he actually had to address it publicly during a town hall Q&A session.
And his explanation was not about branding, and it certainly wasn't about trying to appear relatable or modest. His explanation was rooted in cognitive psychology. He stated explicitly that he wanted to clear his life of all extraneous choices so that he had to make as few decisions as possible about anything other than how to best serve his company.
Here's where it gets really interesting, which completely reframes the behavior. It wasn't a budget constraint. It was a documented, highly intentional, ruthless decision reduction strategy.
It aligns perfectly with a psychological concept researched extensively by the social psychologist Roy Baumeister under the label ego depletion.
Ego depletion. Tell me about that.
Well, to be intellectually rigorous, the sources do note that some specific experimental findings related to ego depletion were heavily debated during the replication crisis of the 2010s in psychology.
Let me pause you right there, because if you aren't a researcher, that sounds like inside baseball. What exactly was the replication crisis, and what does it mean that these findings were debated?
It is an important context. In the 2010s, the field of psychology went through a massive reckoning. Researchers tried to recreate the results of famous textbook psychological studies to see if the original findings held up under modern, stricter scrutiny.
Like checking their homework.
Exactly. And they found that a shocking number of classic studies failed to replicate. The original results couldn't be reproduced, which meant the initial conclusions might have been flawed based on small sample sizes or statistically skewed.
So they threw the baby out with the bathwater.
In some cases, yes. Baumeister's specific laboratory experiments, which often involved having people resist eating chocolate chip cookies and then asking them to solve puzzles, were caught up in this debate. Some researchers couldn't replicate his exact lab results.
Okay, so the cookie puzzle thing maybe doesn't hold up.
Right. However, while the specific lab tests of ego depletion are debated, the broader real-world pattern of what we commonly call decision fatigue remains incredibly robust and widely observed across numerous disciplines.
And the popular way to explain decision fatigue is usually to compare the brain to a smartphone battery, right? You wake up at 100% and every choice drains the battery a little more. But honestly, I always found that metaphor a little passive. A battery just drains.
It's a bit too simple, yeah.
It feels much more accurate to compare decision-making to a physical muscle performing a heavy lift. Every time you have to weigh options, anticipate outcomes, and make a choice, you are forcing your brain to do a mental deadlift.
That is a much more accurate physiological analogy. The cognitive load physically taxes the system.
Right. So if you wake up and you immediately force your brain to do 20 mental deadlifts, just standing in your massive walk-in closet trying to decide which designer outfit best projects your status today, and then you do another 10 deadlifts agonizing over a complex breakfast menu.
You're exhausted before you start.
Exactly. By the time you actually sit down at your desk, the muscle is physically torn and depleted of glucose. You literally have less processing power left over for the decisions that shape your career, your life, or in Zuckerberg's case, a global communication platform.
You have exhausted the resource before the actual work of the day has even begun. And the evidence for how dangerous this mental fatigue can be extends far beyond the wardrobes of Silicon Valley CEOs.
Oh, definitely.
The sources detail an incredibly stark, deeply unsettling piece of research regarding judicial parole boards. Published in 2011 by researcher Shai Danziger and his colleagues, This is where the consequences of decision fatigue stop being about productivity and start being about human liberty.
I am familiar with this study, and the data is absolutely terrifying. The researchers analyzed over 1,000 rulings made by judges on parole boards in Israel. These are highly trained, highly educated professionals making decisions with massive human consequences.
Not just picking out a t-shirt.
No, this is life or death, basically. The entire premise of the justice system is that parole is granted based entirely on the objective merits of the case. The prisoner's record, their rehabilitation, the legal arguments presented.
The law demands absolute objectivity.
But the data exposed a massive systemic failure based entirely on cognitive fatigue. The researchers mapped the rulings against the time of day the judge heard the case.
And the pattern they found is just chilling.
It is. They found that if you were the very first case of the day, right after the judge had rested and eaten breakfast, you had roughly a 65% chance of being granted parole. But as the morning wore on and the judge was forced to make decision after decision after decision, that favorable ruling rate steadily dropped.
It just tanked.
By the time you reach the cases heard right before the judge's lunch break, the probability of being granted parole plummeted to nearly zero.
It approached zero. And then the researchers tracked what happened immediately after the judges took a break, ate a meal, and rested.
The favorable ruling rate spiked right back up to 65%, and then began the exact same downward trajectory as the afternoon wore on.
The researchers linked this pattern directly to the concept of decision fatigue. Think about the mental deadlift you described. Making a favorable ruling granting parole to a convicted criminal requires considering nuance, evaluating future risk, going against the grain, and making a difficult cognitive leap. It is a heavy, heavy lift.
It takes a lot of mental energy to say yes.
Right. Denying parole, on the other hand, is the safe default status quo. It keeps the prisoner in prison. It requires almost zero mental energy. When the judge's mental muscles were physically depleted by the sheer volume of complex choices they had to make, they simply dropped the weight. They defaulted to the easiest, laziest, least risky decision.
And people's lives were ruined not because their cases lacked merit, but simply because they were scheduled at 11:45 a.m. instead of 8:30 a.m.
It's a tragic example of biology overriding objective logic.
When you place the parole board data next to Zuckerberg's gray t-shirt, the underlying mechanism becomes so incredibly obvious. Zuckerberg is violently, ruthlessly eliminating trivial choices from his morning routine so that when it is 4 p.m. and he has to make a billion-dollar structural decision about data privacy or algorithm changes, his brain does not default to the safest, laziest option just because the cognitive muscle is tired.
Precisely. He is hoarding his decision-making bandwidth for when it actually matters.
And it makes total sense.
We see a similar, perhaps even more philosophical manifestation of this with Steve Jobs. The sources highlight that Jobs, a man who possessed the capital to own any architectural masterpiece and fill it with any priceless luxury on earth, famously lived in a house that was almost entirely unfurnished for a large stretch of his life.
Right, the photos of him sitting on the floor.
Exactly. He would sit on the floor in mostly empty rooms, surrounded only by a few highly specific items he deemed necessary.
People often dismiss that as the eccentricity of a tortured genius. You know, like he's just being weird. But analyzing it through the lens of decision fatigue, it is a masterclass in intentionality. He refused to let physical objects accumulate around him because every object requires management.
Every object is a decision waiting to happen.
It is minimalism functioning as the ultimate status symbol, but more importantly, as an impenetrable protective barrier for his focus.
It is the ultimate flex of true wealth, to have infinite resources at your disposal and actively choose empty space. It proves that you understand the mechanics of your own attention. Both Jobs and Zuckerberg realize that buying things to fill up your life does not increase your happiness. It just creates an ever-expanding inventory of things you have to manage, clean, insure, and make decisions about. They optimize for simplicity to protect their bandwidth.
This is where I want you, the listener, to perform a ruthless audit of your own life. Examine your daily routine through this lens. How many trivial, meaningless decisions are draining your battery before you even log into your email?
It's usually more than we think.
Oh, way more. What are you wearing? What podcast are you trying to choose? What specific route are you driving to avoid 3 minutes of traffic? Are you exhausting your mental muscle on things that fundamentally do not matter, leaving yourself entirely depleted for the deep work that actually moves the needle in your career?
It is a critical exercise because once you learn to simplify, Once you stop filling your life with friction and start protecting your mental bandwidth, you free up massive amounts of time and energy. But that leads to the next major question facing those who step off the treadmill.
Right, because simplifying your life preserves your energy. But if you have already achieved significant financial success, and you have achieved this incredible daily simplicity, you still have massive resources sitting in your bank account. You stepped off the treadmill, you stopped buying mansions to impress people, you are wearing the gray t-shirts, but the capital is still there, growing.
So what do you do with it?
Exactly, how do you deploy it?
And this is where the deep dive into the sources reveals an incredible divergence. When we look at individuals who have successfully made the psychological pivot, who realize money is merely a tool, we find they possess wildly different, almost opposing philosophies on exactly how that tool should be utilized.
And understand the spectrum. Let's start with the ultimate master of the long-term hold, Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett is perhaps the single most compelling empirical proof of the Kahneman and Deaton Happiness Plateau study. Here is a man with a net worth frequently exceeding $100 billion. He is historically one of the richest human beings to ever live.
Without a doubt.
And yet, the sources highlight a detail that always shocks people. He still lives in the exact same relatively modest 5-bedroom house in Omaha, Nebraska that he purchased in 1958.
1958, he bought it for roughly $31,000. He hasn't upgraded to a massive compound. He doesn't live on a sprawling fortified estate. He has spent nearly 7 decades in the same Midwestern house.
It's almost unheard of for someone of his wealth.
And crucially, as the investigative piece notes, he doesn't do this because he is a miser who is terrified of spending money. He has spoken very openly and very philosophically about the fact that past a certain baseline of comfort, money simply loses its utility to change your daily life.
Buffett fundamentally cracked the code of hedonic adaptation. He realized decades ago that upgrading his house would not upgrade his happiness, it would just upgrade his property taxes and maintenance headaches.
Just more things to deal with.
Exactly. He is the living embodiment of the idea that once baseline comforts are secured, the equation of more consumption equals more satisfaction is mathematically broken. His philosophy optimizes for ultimate personal simplicity and the long-term compounding of the asset itself. He views wealth not as a ticket to luxury, but as a scorecard of good decision-making.
But the flaw in the Buffett model, if you can call it a flaw, is that while he has solved the treadmill for himself, the capital is essentially sitting idle, compounding in a vault. It isn't actively moving.
That's a very fair critique.
How do you solve for the idle money? That is where we transition to the extraordinary story of Chuck Feeney, who takes this realization in a completely different, much more urgent direction.
Chuck Feeney is a remarkable contrast, and his story is one of the greatest secrets of modern capitalism. He was the co-founder of Duty-Free Shoppers, the retail empire that made him a billionaire. But instead of holding onto his wealth to see how large the scorecard could get, Feeney spent decades of his life actively, aggressively dismantling his fortune.
Dismantling it?
Yes. He established a foundation called Atlantic Philanthropies, and he secretly gave away almost his entire fortune, over $8 billion.
The secrecy is the most fascinating part of his psychology to me. We live in a philanthropic era where billionaires will demand their names be chiseled in marble on a hospital wing for donating a fraction of a % of their net worth.
They want the PR.
Exactly. But Feeney went to extreme lengths, including transferring assets to Bermuda, specifically to avoid disclosure laws so he could give away billions completely anonymously.
It's staggering humility.
And his personal life was even more stripped down, even more radically minimal than Buffett's.
The reporting details how, for large stretches of his later life, Feeney didn't own a home or a car. He famously flew coach well into his senior years. He carried his papers in a plastic bag and wore a $15 Casio watch.
He didn't just adapt to his wealth. He viewed it as a burden to be ethically discarded.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, he built an entire philosophical framework called giving while living. His mission was to completely drain his foundation and give his fortune away before he died, rather than leaving it for a bloated bureaucracy to manage posthumously.
He wanted to see the impact.
Right. He believed that the impact of the capital and the personal existential meaning derived from that impact was most potent when he was alive, to actually witness the change it created in the world.
He bridged the gap. He proved that the joy of extreme wealth isn't in hoarding it, and it isn't in consuming it. The joy is in deploying it for systemic impact, and he was so deeply influential that the sources explicitly credit him as the primary inspiration behind the Giving Pledge.
The initiative with Bill Gates, right?
Right, the initiative where billionaires like Bill Gates and, ironically, Warren Buffett publicly commit to giving away the majority of their wealth. Feeney showed them the blueprint.
He really did.
But even Feeney's model, brilliant as it was, took decades to execute through a traditional foundation structure. What if you want to bypass bureaucracy entirely?
That brings us to the most modern and perhaps most structurally disruptive evolution of this philosophy. Mackenzie Scott.
Mackenzie Scott is fascinating because she takes Feeney's urgency, multiplies it by 10, and completely removes the traditional guardrails. Following her divorce from Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, she ended up with a staggering fortune of tens of billions of dollars, and her approach to deploying that capital through her organization, Yield Giving, has been completely unprecedented in the history of philanthropy.
To understand why her approach is so radical, we have to look at how traditional mega philanthropy usually works. Institutions like the Ford Foundation or the Gates Foundation move slowly. They have massive boards of directors. They require nonprofits to submit labyrinthine grant proposals. They demand endless quarterly reporting, and they tightly control how every single dollar is spent. The friction is immense.
The overhead alone is staggering. The traditional model treats the nonprofits like untrustworthy contractors.
Exactly. Scott looked at that system and completely inverted it. The sources detail how she has given away tens of billions of dollars in just a few short years. But the velocity is only half the story. The structure is what is truly revolutionary.
Tell me about the structure.
She engages in what is called trust-based philanthropy. She and her team quietly research organizations doing effective work on the ground. Then, they simply call them up and transfer massive multi-million-dollar grants with absolutely zero strings attached.
No proposals, no reporting requirements, no naming rights. Just a massive injection of capital with a note saying, "We trust you to know how to spend this better than we do."
Her public letters outline her philosophy with incredible clarity. There is a recurring theme in her writing. The idea that money sitting unused in an endowment or slowly trickled out over decades to preserve the foundation's lifespan is actually a profound failure of the capital's purpose. She does not view the goal as hoarding resources to ensure her foundation exists forever. She views the goal as moving those resources toward operators, creating systemic change as directly, efficiently, and quickly as humanly possible.
She has taken the theoretical concept of money as a tool to its most literal kinetic extreme. It is not a scorecard like it is for Buffett. It is not something to sit on. It is a kinetic energy that is actively decaying in utility if it is not deployed.
That's a brilliant way to frame it.
When you look at Buffett, Feeney, and Scott, you see a spectrum of solutions to the exact same problem. They all successfully beat the hedonic treadmill. They all realized that accumulating more stuff was a psychological trap. Buffett solved the trap through ultimate simplicity and holding. Feeney solved it through extreme, secretive, lifelong giving. And Scott solved it through high-velocity, systemic, trust-based impact. But the unifying thread is that all three of them deliberately moved their optimization target away from the acquisition of the number.
It is an incredible macro-level analysis of capital deployment. But we have to acknowledge a fundamental truth here.
Right. It is incredibly easy to talk about the nobility of wearing a $15 watch or the philosophy of giving away billions of dollars when you have an infinite, bulletproof financial safety net underneath you.
Exactly. It is a position of immense structural privilege to be able to abstract money into a philosophical tool.
So the critical challenge for us now is translation. How does this heavily documented billionaire-level psychological pivot translate to you, the listener? Because the reality is the person listening right now is likely in the trenches of their career. They are actively trying to manage human capital. They might be trying to pay off a mortgage, scale a small business, or secure a director-level promotion. They do not have $50 billion to experiment with.
No, they don't.
How do we take the macro lessons of Kahneman, Deaton, Buffett, and Scott and synthesize them into actionable, universally applicable life lessons for the professional?
To make that translation, we have to look at a completely different branch of the research, focusing specifically on the daily trade-offs between time and money. This is where the work of Ashley Whillans, a behavioral scientist at Harvard Business School, becomes the most critical part of our analysis. She has published extensively on a metric she calls time affluence.
Time affluence. That is such a powerful phrase. It immediately reframes our cultural definition of what constitutes actual wealth.
It completely shifts the paradigm. Willen's research focuses on what happens psychologically when individuals actively prioritize time over income. And her findings across numerous studies and demographics are incredibly clear. Among individuals who have already reached that baseline plateau of having their physiological needs met, prioritizing time over money is one of the single strongest predictors of elevated life satisfaction.
So what does this all mean? Once you have crossed your specific financial plateau, once you are no longer stressed about making rent or buying groceries, how you choose to allocate your resources dictates your happiness far more than how many additional resources you can hoard.
Precisely. In Willen's longitudinal studies, she found that people who regularly made choices to trade money for more free time consistently reported higher levels of happiness and lower levels of stress than people who continued to optimize purely for maximizing their income.
But let's get into the granular mechanics of this. What does trading money for time actually look like for someone working a demanding corporate job? I mean, it doesn't mean retiring at 30 and moving to an ashram.
No, and that is the beauty of the data. The research demonstrated that you don't need to make massive lifestyle changes to see the benefit. Even small micro trades have a disproportionately massive impact on your neurobiology.
Give me an example of a micro trade.
For example, paying someone to do a time-consuming chore instead of grinding through it yourself on your day off, outsourcing your laundry, paying a premium for grocery delivery, hiring a service to clean your house or mow the lawn. You are deploying capital to surgically remove friction from your life. You are spending money to free up 2 hours of your Saturday.
And the data shows that the people who spent their money on those services were measurably happier than the people who just kept the extra cash in their savings account.
Consistently happier. This is the fascinating part. Even when the people who optimized for income ended up with a demonstrably larger total net worth, the people who optimized for time affluence still reported a significantly higher overall life satisfaction.
That is the ultimate actionable takeaway of this entire deep dive. When you pay for a time-saving service, you have to stop looking at it as a luxury expense where you are losing money. You are engaging in a highly strategic transaction. You are literally buying back an hour of your life. You are utilizing a renewable resource fiat currency to purchase the only strictly non-renewable resource in the universe, your time.
This concept is deeply echoed and expanded upon in the work of Elizabeth Dunn and Michael Norton, the researchers behind the widely referenced behavioral economics book, Happy Money. They studied not just how much wealth people accumulate, but specifically the mechanics of how they deploy it to generate joy.
And they found a massive psychological divergence between buying physical things and buying time or experiences.
A huge divergence.
I really want to dive deeply into the why here. Explain the mechanics to me like I'm 5 years old. Why does buying a clean house yield so much more durable happiness than buying a brand new expensive couch?
It comes back to evolutionary biology and sensory gating, which we touched on with hedonic adaptation. When you buy a brand new expensive couch, it is a static physical object. For the first few days, your visual cortex registers it as novel. So you get a small dopamine hit when you look at it. But very quickly, your brain realizes this object does not pose a threat and does not offer a new reward. To save sensory processing power, your brain actively tunes the couch out. It literally fades into the background of your consciousness. It ceases to generate any emotional response whatsoever. The adaptation is rapid and total.
A couch becomes invisible.
Exactly. But when you spend that same amount of money to hire a cleaning service to scrub your bathrooms and vacuum your floors every week, you are not buying a static object. You're buying the active removal of a recurring low-level stressor.
Oh, that makes sense.
You are removing the friction of anticipating the chore, the physical exhaustion of doing the chore, and the guilt of putting off the chore. The feeling of relief you experience when you walk into a clean house on a Friday evening, knowing your entire weekend is now yours to spend with your family or just resting. That relief does not depreciate. The brain does not tune out the absence of stress. It remains a durable, lasting source of contentment.
Because physical possessions are exactly what the hedonic treadmill is powered by. Buying stuff feeds the beast. Buying time starves the beast and creates durable, resilient happiness.
Well said.
The application here for the professional is that you must view the principles of time affluence as a universal strategy for managing human capital. Whether you are an entry-level manager or a C-suite executive, the optimization target has to pivot from accumulating capital to accumulating bandwidth, and you have to start doing it now. Do not wait until some imaginary financial finish line is crossed, because as the survey of the $80 million cohort proved, if you don't change your mindset today, that finish line will just keep moving until you die.
It requires a profound level of self-awareness regarding your own trajectory. Early in your career, as the Plateau data pointed out, every dollar is solving a very real, very dangerous problem. You are securing housing, you are building an emergency fund, you are opening up options you didn't have before. During that phase, it is entirely rational and necessary to be fiercely focused on maximizing your income.
But the existential danger is falling asleep at the wheel while your income grows. Young professionals have to remain incredibly vigilant. You have to notice the exact quiet moment when those baseline problems are actually permanently solved. You have to notice the month when you pay your bills and you no longer feel a spike of adrenaline.
Yes, that's the turning point.
Because that is the critical moment you have to consciously, deliberately, and perhaps painfully pivot.
You have to pivot your optimization target from accumulating more resources to having fewer obligations to manage. The trap is that most people simply raise their standard of living every time they get a raise. They get a promotion, they lease a more expensive car, they get a bonus, they move to a larger apartment that requires more furniture.
If you blindly upgrade your lifestyle every time your salary bumps up, you are just increasing the speed and the incline of the treadmill.
Yeah.
You are actively engineering a life where you will always need more money just to maintain the new baseline.
Exactly. It's a self-inflicted wound.
But if you take that raise and use it to buy back your commute by moving closer to the office, or if you use it to outsource the tasks you hate, you are building actual structural affluence.
The synthesis of all this research, from Kahneman's emotional plateau to Zuckerberg's decision fatigue to Willen's time affluence, is that the ultimate luxury in human existence is autonomy. It is the reduction of friction. It is not the gray t-shirt itself that matters. It is the profound relief that Zuckerberg does not have to spend cognitive energy thinking about what to wear.
Okay, let's bring all these incredible threads together. We have covered a massive amount of ground today, tracing the psychological behavior of the ultra-wealthy all the way down to the daily granular choices we make about our time and energy.
It requires a total paradigm shift. To summarize the core investigative finding of our deep dive, the ultimate truth is absolutely not that money stops mattering once you reach a certain level. That is a dangerous oversimplification, often peddled by people who already have money.
Right. Money always matters. It is a vital tool.
It always matters.
Oh.
But the target must quietly move. For the individuals who actually manage to find contentment, the goal shifts away from the sheer size of the number in the bank account and focuses entirely on what that number was always supposed to buy in the very first place: time, freedom, and protective mental headspace.
If you never consciously make that switch, you can achieve everything society tells you to strive for. You can sit on tens of millions of dollars, technically having made it by every single external metric, and you will still feel exactly as behind, exactly as inadequate, and exactly as anxious as you did when you had nothing, because the finish line was never actually about the money to begin with.
And that leads to one final, deeply provocative thought that emerges when you look at all of these psychological studies layered on top of each other. It is a thread we haven't explicitly pulled yet, but one that is lingering right beneath the surface of the data.
Oh, I like where this is going. What is the final thread?
We spent a significant amount of time discussing the concept of ego depletion and decision fatigue. We talked about how the constant barrage of daily choices physically taxes the cognitive muscle, limiting our ability to make complex decisions later in the day, like those parole board judges defaulting to the easiest, laziest option before lunch.
Right, the mental deadlift that leaves you depleted.
Well, what if we apply that concept not just to a single Tuesday, but to the grand arc of an entire human life? What if the constant, unyielding, decades-long grind of the hedonic treadmill, the endless pursuit of the next promotion, the larger house, the better zip code, the newer car, is actually creating a chronic, lifelong state of structural decision fatigue?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy thought.
Think about the cognitive load. If you are constantly managing an ever-expanding portfolio of physical stuff, social obligations, and status anxieties, your mental bandwidth is permanently maxed out. Perhaps the reason so many people, even the incredibly wealthy, never make that conscious choice to pivot from optimizing for money to optimizing for time isn't because they are inherently greedy or because they are bad people.
It's because the muscle is completely torn. They are too tired.
Exactly. Perhaps the sheer friction of pursuing the wealth has left them so deeply, chronically mentally exhausted that they literally lack the cognitive bandwidth to realize there is another way to live. They were the parole board judges at 3 p.m., and staying on the treadmill, continuing to chase the next dollar, is simply the default low-energy choice. To step off the treadmill, to restructure your life around time and simplicity, requires a massive burst of intentional cognitive energy that they simply no longer possess.
That is absolutely staggering. The unthinking pursuit of the wealth actually destroys the mental capacity required to enjoy the wealth once you have it. That is something I'm going to be mulling over for a long, long time.
It certainly challenges the fundamental narrative we are taught about success.
It really does. Because in the end, that childhood myth we started with, the glorious finish line tape you break through, it simply does not exist. There is no finish line. There is only the treadmill and the terrifying, exhausting, necessary choice to step off it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the true psychology of wealth. Take a hard look at your own optimization targets this week. And remember, true affluence isn't about owning the most things. It's about owning your time.